The Mariners survived to win last night, but potentially at a cost. We'll talk about Andrés Muñoz's injury and some options to help beef up the bullpen in this reliever-centric episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. This is Toddy Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Pretty sketchy 4-3 win for the Mariners last night. Andrés Muñoz had to leave the game early with a back issue. We'll talk about that, as well as the Mariners moving their top pitching prospect to the bullpen. And then we'll look at some bullpen options outside the organization the Mariners could potentially land right now. But before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's LOCKDON to get yourself started. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So before we get into this Munoz stuff here, Colby, let's talk a little bit about that game last night. Like I said, pretty sketchy win, but it is a win after all, and they all count the same. But I would classify the Mariners pitching, or at least watching when they were on defense last night, as anxiety-inducing. The A's bats were pretty relentless from the 6th inning onward. They had at least one base runner in each of those last 4 innings of this game. But again, the Mariners were able to survive. They were able to survive the injury to Andrés Muñoz. Taylor Saucedo was able to close the door against Brent Rooker, of all people, too. Pretty tough spot for Sauce to be in there, but he got the job done, so that's great. Takeaways from last night's game, Colby?
It was a weird game, simply because, George Kirby, pretty good, not great. We've certainly seen him a lot worse. We've certainly seen him better. Offense, fine, but not great. They scored 4 runs. They had 10 hits. They only struck out 7 times. Those are all good things, but, you watch the game and it's like, they had a lot of, non-competitive at-bats in the last 4 or 5 innings of that game. So it was just kind of a weird game. The bullpen, good enough to get the job done, not very good, in totality. So it was just kind of a weird game, and you got to give Oakland a lot of credit. They very clearly wanted to, get Kirby's pitch count up. They didn't chase really all that much. They fouled off a ton of pitches. They went to battle with 2 strikes. They didn't roll over. So even though they struck out 9 times, they got it to a point where, Kirby probably shouldn't have gone back out, in the 6th, although, that's subjective. It wasn't an egregious decision by Scott to send him back out there. It just kind of felt like he was done. It was a lot of long innings for him that day. And we know that he's still got the knee thing, although we don't know how big of an issue that is now still. But, it just looked like he was done, and they tried to stretch him, and it's not hard to see why, because the middle of the Mariners bullpen stinks. So, it's just one of those things where, Oakland did a lot of things to make you uncomfortable. They really did a nice job at the plate of, fouling off good pitches and not chasing pitchers' pitches. They had a lot of really good at-bats.
Especially in that 9th inning. It was very frustrating to watch.
Right. I mean, in the 9th inning, too, a couple of those hits, they're, seeing eye singles that just happen to be hitting the right spot. They both had expected batting averages of under 100. And then, Blade doesn't chase, and all of a sudden it's the base is juiced. And so they did a really good job of just, not handing the Mariners free outs. You had to earn all 27 outs. And so, you got to give Oakland a lot of credit. That's about as good as, as good as they could hope to do in terms of executing a game plan against this Mariners pitching staff. And so I guess in a way, good on the Mariners for finding a way to win a game where they didn't play all that well and Oakland did play pretty well, but it was just a weird game overall. Very weird vibe. It never felt settled. It was not pleasant. It was not a pleasant viewing experience. That's for sure.
No, like you said, it was a really weird game where a lot of ups and downs in this one, where for a time there, it looked like the Mariners were going to run away with this one. They had the 4 doubles in the 3rd inning. They put up 3 on Mitch Spence. And then, the game goes along and it's like, wow, the A's kind of look like the better team tonight. And it looks like the Mariners are possibly going to blow this thing, especially once we got to the 9th. Munoz obviously looked not right, which let's talk about that now. They said that the injury flared up. This is obviously, according to them, been something that he's been dealing with for a while, this back issue. Apparently he's been wearing a brace while pitching, which makes his dominance all the more impressive over the last little while here. There was a shot of him earlier on in his outing where he was kind of stretching the back out. He obviously threw his first pitch in the dirt. Just didn't seem like he was right. Friend of the show, Ben Ranieri, was at the game sitting behind home plate. He was telling me when it was happening, like, Munoz doesn't look right. And then obviously the collision at the plate, you're worried about his ankle or his knee or something like that. Thankfully, nothing like that occurred there, but they did say that the back flared up on that. But I don't know. I feel like it was already kind of causing him some issues. So he's going to undergo an MRI today. We might actually have news of this by the time this episode actually drops. We might have an update on Munoz. The hope right now is just something that, maybe tightened up on him. He had the last couple days off. Maybe it tightened up on him on the flight or something like that. Who knows? And he's only going to need a few days to kind of recover and get back to, as close to 100% as he can be. But if this is more of a long-term issue, I mean, Jerry's got to get on the phone immediately, right? Because, like, you're running with Austin Voth, Trent Thornton, Taylor Saucedo, Mike Baumann, etc. to close out games for you.
Yeah, Ryan Stanek. All of whom would require them pitching in more high-leverage roles than they already are. Not going to work. It's not going to work the way you want it to. So, it's Munoz obviously spiked the first pitch, and I think he fell behind 3-0 on the first hitter, and then he spiked the wild pitch, later in the game to make it a 1-run game. So he very clearly was not 100% before the collision at the plate. And we've seen the Mariners kind of try and do this, like they're trying to. I don't want to say they're trying to push guys through injuries, but Kirby had the knee thing, right? Wu has this arm thing. Munoz has this back thing. They, kept Polanco active for 10 days, even though he couldn't play. Like, they just seem very hesitant to use the IL and they're trying to like manage these guys and get them through these things without losing them. And you can do that. And at some, to some extent you have to do stuff like that because you just can't put a guy on the IL every single time. Like, he sleeps wrong and his neck is sore. Like, there are things you have to push through, and you have to manage small things like this throughout the year. But it feels like the Mariners have been very hesitant to use the IL. They probably don't feel great about their depth. And in this particular case, they probably shouldn't, because you go look down at what's available in AAA. Nobody down there in that bullpen is throwing the ball particularly well this year. So, like, as much as hype as I was about Carlos Vargas, hasn't really figured it out. He's been a little bit better recently. Like, we were pretty high on the depth they had built down in AAA with Vargas, with Crable, with Buttrey, with all those guys, and just none of them. I mean, like right now, Colin Snyder is up with the team still over those guys. Right. And so, and those guys are all middle guys anyways. It sucks. You didn't anticipate losing Brash for the season. You didn't anticipate, possibly losing Santos for the season. It's Spire is still up in the air, but if you get him back before the All-Star break, I'd consider that a pretty big upset. So you almost lost Saucedo for a long time. So it's been a disaster on the injury front with the bullpen, and Seattle has really tried to manage these injuries instead of like, hey, let's just put them on the IL for 10 days, get them right, and then we'll reassess there. So they're really trying to push these guys through this thing. And, the players are obviously trying to push through it too. And it's, like the Mariners didn't even know that Spire was hurting. Apparently Spire had to tell them that he had been pitching through, what was it, a shoulder thing for a couple of weeks at that point. So, players are trying to gut it out. The coaching staff and the trainers, they're doing their best to make sure these guys can play as much as they possibly can. But it's been a really weird year on how the Mariners have kind of handled these type of injuries.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some options they could look at to acquire right this second if they have to do something like that. I mean, even if Munoz is still good to go, they should probably still add someone like we've talked about for the last couple weeks, like an actual like mid to high leverage arm. We'll do that a little later on in the show, but first we're actually going to talk about another potential option for the bullpen that has apparently cropped up here over the last 24 hours. In just a moment, but first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, and I get to see the view of every seat in the house, so I know exactly what I'm buying. Game Time's last-minute deals give you up to 60% in savings buying last minute for sports, music, comedy, and more. And to avoid any surprises at checkout, you can turn on their all-in pricing to see the full cost, fees included. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. You can catch Game 2 between the M's and the A's tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So we're talking all about the bullpen on today's episode. We got some pretty interesting news yesterday that the Mariners' top pitching prospect, Logan Evans, has now been moved to the bullpen down in Double-A. And that would seem to indicate that they're getting him ready to make his major league debut at some point. I'm sure we all remember them doing this with Edwin Diaz a few years back, and that obviously worked out amazingly. For Diaz, that took him about 3 weeks for him to get ready to make his major league debut. So I would think Evans is on a similar timeline, assuming that that all works out, that he takes to that role well and whatnot. So what do you think about that move? Is this kind of a sign of desperation, or are you actually excited about the possibility of what Logan Evans can bring to the table?
Yeah, I'm more concerned than excited, just because unlike Edwin Diaz, there is a very clear path to Logan Evans being a solid, starting pitcher at the big league level. I think, we think about Diaz, we think now the nasty slider, 98 to 100. That wasn't who he was when he made the transition. He was 93, 94 with a pretty good slider, but probably about 50 grade slider and like a 30 grade changeup with 40, 45 command and control. He was a good athlete, but he was really small, right? So there was durability concerns there. So Evans, meanwhile, is like 6'3". He's like 200 pounds. He's got a super smooth delivery. He's 93 to 94, can touch 95, 96, and apparently in side sessions, he's even hit 99, 100. So, but it's very smooth delivery. The breaking stuff is getting there. It's pretty solid right now, but it's not plus or anything like that. And he does have a changeup, and he's got a 4-seamer and a 2-seamer, and he's got a little bit of a cutter. Like he's a kitchen sink type of guy. So he definitely can start at the major league level, probably as soon as next year. Okay. If they need him to. And so I'm wondering how extreme are the Mariners going to get with this? Are they going to shorten up his delivery? Are they going to try and speed him up to try and extract every ounce of, velocity and spin out of him that they can? And they could do that. But the concern there then is that you kind of not necessarily go back to square one to get him ready to start again if you need him to next year or the year after. But it's just, it's a concern. It could throw your mechanics out of whack for when you do go back to starting. Like, obviously learning how to do that is difficult, and it puts new strain on your body that you're not used to. So I'm a little bit concerned about, how they plan to handle Evans in the long term. If they're just going to basically tell him like, hey, just go about this like you would as a starter, but you're going to come in out of the bullpen. Then I think that's probably the best. But if they want to try and extract some high leverage out of this guy right now, they kind of have to speed him up, and he's got to be sitting 98, 99, which we know he can touch, but it's a big difference between, pitching 1 inning and pitching 6 innings. So we don't know like if the velocity can play up. If he loses his command and control with the fastball and his velocity is that high, we don't know what the movement's like on the pitch. And we don't know if speeding him up, like his delivery up and maximizing his spin is actually going to make the curveball or slider significantly better. So I don't know exactly what their role is here. My guess, just based on how they used him last night, even, is that it's kind of a multi-inning, like, hey man, like probably not stylistically, but probably like you go be Colin McHugh for us over the next couple months, where you go 2 or 3, like, hey, you know what? Brian Woo's only going to go 4 today. We're going to short script him. You get the next 2 after that. So I'm a little concerned that, this will throw off his development as a starting pitcher a little bit. But again, you kind of give the Mariners the benefit of the doubt in this regard. It's also kind of a similar plan to what they did with Matt Brash, even more recently than Edwin Diaz. But Evans doesn't have the stuff that Brash had when they made that transition, but I'm not so sure that he doesn't have similar enough stuff to Edwin Diaz when he made that transition that it couldn't work. But I'm just a little bit concerned because I do think that Evans' future is as a starting pitcher, whereas when they did this with Diaz, it was pretty clear at that point that at best he was going to be a number 5 starter at the big league level. I think Evans could be, a really good number 4 or even a low end 3 if he just maintains course. So we'll see what the Mariners want to do. We'll see what their game plan is. How they plan to get him ready to get big league hitters out. But obviously it's super interesting because Evans is the best pitching prospect in the system. And I don't think it's really close at this stage. No,
it's not. And that also might say a bit more about the state of the Mariners pitching in their farm right now than anything. But, we've heard Jerry DiPoto, even on this show, talk about Logan Evans. Like, they are very, very, very high on Logan Evans. He's had a really good year down in AA. He's not striking out a lot of guys, averaging less than a K per 9.
Been better in his last
averaging less than a K per inning, I should say. 8.1 Ks per 9 this year. 270 walks per 9, over 53 and a third innings pitched. That's 10 starts, 11 appearances in total. He made his first appearance as a reliever last night, gave up a run unearned. 1.18 ERA, 3.62 FIP down in AA.
Right. The Ks per 9 have gone up pretty significantly after the month of April. He started to miss a lot more bats, and so overall that number is deflated, but he has started to miss more bats here as he's kind of got acclimated. And we need to keep this in mind too. Prior to this year, Logan Evans had 5 professional games in Modesto. So he completely skipped high A, and he made 10 starts in AA, and now he's getting essentially confirmed that he will make his major league debut this year, and it'll probably be sometime, if not before the All-Star break, immediately after the All-Star break. So this is it's not a rush job, but this is a very fast track to the big leagues.
Yeah. If it's a similar timeline to Diaz and July 1st, potentially for Evans. So yeah. So we'll have to keep an eye on him and his next few outings down in AA. It's really interesting stuff. But the Mariners ultimately, they need to get some established help in the bullpen ASAP, whether or not Andrés Munoz has to go on the IL.
Yeah. Real fast, let your prop talk. There's some milestones to look at as we
hold on. Let me interrupt you real quick so I can bounce my ego off of you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Although not quite sure what podcast you're listening to, but I appreciate it either way.
I don't think he's ever listened to a podcast before, by the way.
Maybe that was his first one. Like, we don't know.
Welcome to the wonderful world of podcasts, friend.
Sure. I guess like a couple milestones to look for as you're like, how close is Logan Evans? And this could change if they have to like rush him even more. Like maybe Munoz goes on the IL and they're just like, put Evans up here. Like he's our best bet. So, but obviously you want to see him. Last night he went 2 innings. Now you want to see like how fast does he get back into the game? How fast does he recover? Does he need 3 days? Well, that's not going to work, right? If you're a reliever. So you want to see him pitch. You want to see him go pitch, day off, pitch. Then you want to see him throw back-to-back games. You want to see him come like in the middle of an inning and get a couple guys out and then maybe go sit and then come back out and do that. So, there's a lot of things that, you don't do as a starter, right? You don't start an inning with guys on base as a starter. That's something you want to do as a reliever. You don't have you don't pitch back-to-back games as a starter. You don't pitch, twice in 3 days or 3 times in 4 days as a starter. So some of the stuff that he's going to have to do for the first time at the big league level. But when you start wondering like, hey, how soon is he? Well, has he pitched in back-to-back games yet? No. They might ask him to do that for the first time at the big league level, but they're not going to ask him to go 2 games in 3 days for the first time at the big league level. So that's something to watch. Has he gone into a game, with runners on base? Has he inherited runners? No. Well, they're probably not going to ask him to do that for the first time at the big league level. So just think about all the things that a reliever has to face that a starter typically doesn't. And once you start to see enough of those things get checked off, then you can start to anticipate, hey, he's probably, X number of days away, give or take, from being called up.
Absolutely. All right, so let's look outside the organization at some relievers the Mariners could potentially land right this second in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's LOCKEDON, and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, you can catch a game 2 between the M's and the A's tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast of SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. And as we're recording this, the Houston Astros have lost to the St. Louis Cardinals. So the Mariners have the ability tonight to expand their lead over the Astros to 8 games. See if the Rangers will get swept by the Tigers tonight. Which would also present the opportunity to the Mariners to extend their AL West lead to 6.5 games. Let's talk about the bullpen some more here. Like I said, this is a reliever-centric episode. Let's now look outside the organization. We already talked about this. Like, if Andrés Muñoz has to go on the IL, if we get bad news today, Jerry has to get on the phone immediately. Justin Hollander has to get on the phone immediately. They cannot proceed with just Ryan Stanek and Trent Thornton and Austin Voth trying to hold things down. Like they just can't do that. No matter how light their schedule is starting to get, can't do it. They need to get established at least mid to high leverage help right now. Mm-hmm. So who could that be, Colby? Who do you think is actually available right now on June 5th?
That's the tricky part, right?
Yeah.
Who's actually available? So you have to kind of look at the teams that are absolutely 100% already selling. Miami, Oakland, Chicago, maybe the Mets. And that's pretty much it, because everybody else just seems to be hovering around 500. So they're not really sure which way they're going to go. So you start looking at, relievers who could be available. If you trade for one this early, it's going to cost you a little bit more than if you wait for, a month, but you kind of don't have that luxury. So the first guy who jumps out is actually playing you tonight, in theory, unless you want to pull that trigger ahead of time. Austin Adams. The Mariners and their fans very familiar with Adams. Mm-hmm. Definitely misses a lot of bats. He's kind of fills in that 7th inning role, ideally, but obviously if Munoz is going to miss time, he's the guy who could get some high leverage outs for you. Tanner Scott is a guy that we've talked about a lot already. He's a rental. He's really started to turn it around here recently. The numbers are back under control. Another guy who can miss some bats, get some high leverage outs for you. He's a lefty.
And by Fangraphs standards last year, he was the most valuable reliever in all of baseball, which I disagree with, but he still had a really good year last year.
Right. I mean, it's definitely, and again, the beauty of Tanner Scott is that if you acquire him now, for example, right, not only do you get another month or 6 weeks of value out of him than you would if you waited, but when Munoz comes back, look, I already got the high leverage arm I needed.
Right.
Early. So that's one less thing I have to do at the deadline, even if it costs me a little bit more to get it done now. So Tanner Scott's a pretty obvious one. And then one of my dark horse favorites here, Michael Kopech, former starter, failed starter for the White Sox. He's got a
really good fastball.
He's got a year and a half left, I believe, of club control. Yeah, great fastball. Throws it about 80% of the time. It sits 98 to 100.
Yeah.
And
He's also averaging 30% whiff rates on both the fastball and the slider right now, I believe,
yeah,
which the Mariners could really use some more swing and
Mhm.
miss in their bullpen.
Yeah, the slider is not a joke either. Like it's a good pitch. It's a really good pitch. Just the fastball is a great pitch. And this year he's transitioned to the bullpen. He's throwing more strikes. He doesn't throw a lot of strikes, but that's okay. Matt Brash doesn't throw a lot of strikes either. That's just the trade-off you make. You have filthy stuff. You can miss. You can get a lot of swings and misses. If you can do all that, if you can get all those swings and misses, then you're okay walking a couple extra guys more so than you would think. So if you're just looking for a high leverage play, like you're hoping to maybe even tweak something a little bit more and get a little bit more out of a guy, like Kopech is the guy that I would look at. And we know that the White Sox are open for business right now. Of course they are. So yeah, that's the guy that I would go talk to, and or that's a guy I would go talk to his team and try to get, because I think you get him right now, and I think you can get him for it's not going to cost you one of your top 15 prospects, I don't think. So Kopech is probably the guy that I would actually try and go get right now if I had to pick one. But there's quite a few other options that make a lot of sense.
Dude, the White Sox have lost their last 12 games.
Well, they've won 15 games all year, and it's June 5th. So
yeah, they are 15-46 right now.
I think they're open for business.
So I guess the biggest remaining question here is, what would it take to actually acquire those guys? And what are you willing to give up to make a deal happen right now?
Sure. Adams is a rental who cost Oakland nothing, and there's some serious regression scare there for a guy who's also had a lot of injury concerns. So to me, I think the best prospect you'd have to give up to get like Austin Adams, like Carlos Vargas. Like I really do think this is like, hey, we'll trade you 5 years of this potential high leverage guy for 3 months of this current leverage guy. But it might, Oakland sometimes likes both. So it might be like Marcelo Perez and Axel Sanchez and Troy Taylor, right? Like it might be something like that. Tanner Scott probably going to cost a little more. He's got a bit more of a track record. Is a high leverage guy. So that might be maybe Ryan Bliss kind of as the headliner there. Just they need shortstop help. Bliss can play there right now if they need him to. So maybe Ryan Bliss is the headliner there. I think that's probably the most I'd be willing to do. Someone in the Bliss bucket, and then Kopech is an interesting one. I think for a guy like Kopech, I do like.
You said it's a year and a half left for him, right?
I think so. Yeah. So I do like Clase, and I probably do something like Clase, Vargas, and like maybe Marcelo Perez or maybe like Walter Ford. If
it's probably a pretty similar package to what you gave them for Gregory Santos.
Yeah. Less club control, obviously. So, but I do think that, Clase is probably a little bit better than Deloach.
Well, and let's just be real about it. You probably get taxed a little bit because you're trying to make a deal happen right now instead of at the deadline. Right.
So yeah, like I think Chicago, like if I'm trading Kopech right now, like I'm really interested in Clase because he's a guy that I could just give playing time to this year.
Yeah.
He brings some kind of excitement factor to me. I get him for 6 years, actually 7 years, and I have the at-bats to give him. So I think Clase is a guy who's going to be really appealing to somebody like the White Sox, especially since, in theory, I mean, he's not major league ready, but you can put him on the major league field and, tell your fans that this guy's part of the future. And you got him for a year and a half of a reliever who you were probably set to non-tender if this year didn't go the way that you wanted it to. So I think Clase can carry that, but I think it's, I think it'll be.
If they come back to you and they're like Michael Arroyo, are you out? Are you telling them to take a hike? Considering how much you need this help.
Really like Michael Arroyo. I feel like he's underrated, but like, can you throw in Tommy Pham? and I just give you, you give me Pham and Kopech, and I'll give you Michael Arroyo. But yeah, the White Sox also might do bulk. They did bulk for Aaron Bummer. So it's a little tough to say right now, but I'm certainly willing to discuss the Clases, the Ryan Bliss, as much as I like the dude. Michael Morales. And again, like, because these teams are probably looking 2, 3, 4 years down the line, this is where guys like AJ Izzy and Walter Ford could carry some interesting value in these deals as well. So the Mariners can absolutely afford to get one of these guys right now. It's just a matter of, are other teams being remotely reasonable with their ask at this time of year? And we don't know.
That's going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.